How we all doing tonight? So we'll wait a few moments as a few people are coming on. Hmm? No. All right, beautiful evening tonight. We'll wait a few extra moments. All right. Hope everyone has a nice glass of wine ready to go. Should we start, honey? Hmm? All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. This is very exciting for me. This is my first virtual wine class. It's something that many friends over time have said, "Why don't you do a virtual wine class?" And it's here we are. But thank you for devoting a little bit of your early evening to join us tonight. As we're all navigating through this coronavirus crisis together, I'm sure we can all agree that staying connected with family and friends is something that brings us great comfort. And one of the great attributes and aspects of wine that I love so much is that it serves in that it helps bring us together, family and friends, as a pond, as a sharing aspect to our lives. So it took as we're here in the shelter in place environment, it's allowed me the opportunity to do the best that I can to bring the wine classes that I've been teaching over years and years, of course, live to you, to as many people as possible virtually, and to bring and elevate wine appreciation for all of us, and to share this beautiful uh, love of wine that we all share. So thank you again. So, the educated grape. I am. Many of you know me quite well. It's many of you are listening as well that may not know me. I'm a wine educator. The educated grape is a wine education and event business. Obviously, not having events, it's my goal to sort of bring wine appreciation to you. Um, what you'll expect is tasting. We'll talk about a different theme. It's my goal in theme wine classes to the themes are really four part. It's either a region, it's either a grape varietal that we'll focus on. It could be a trend, and in terms of tonight, it's not only a trend but it's a region. So we're going to focus in on two grape varietals that are really becoming more and more of a trend in the wine world, especially in a lot of restaurants that are featuring sort of more progressive wine lists. And you'll see them more and more in your wine shops. And it's a very seasonal theme, which I'm excited about because, and tonight's a great example here. And we're in central New Jersey. It's warming up. We're as we drink wine, we sort of drink as the temperature dictates. So these wines they're vibrant, they're light to medium embodied, um, and they really are wonderful with sort of kinds of foods that we typically enjoy in the springtime. So tonight's a little bit of a sneak peek. So my goal is with my monthly wine classes is to offer a 45 to 1 hour experience, and I have two of those scheduled later in the month. But what I wanted to do tonight is to sort of provide a little bit of a taste of what I'll be offering. And it's a nice little dose of wine education and appreciation, some tips that you may not realize or know, and things that you can use in your everyday wine enjoyment, and of course to taste some great wine and enjoy this experience together. um, so I see that some of you have wine ready to go, and I love that because we're going to taste some wine in just a moment. um, the theme tonight, I thought it was appropriate, being of Greek origin and being a great seasonal wine, is we're going to focus in on one of my favorite white grape varietals, and that's a Sirtiko from Santorini, Greece, and a red grape varietal called Gamay from the Beaujolais region in a little south of Burgundy. So both are sort of really, really pretty wines that again lend themselves. So earlier today, um, I downloaded some materials for your sort of added enhancement, enjoyment in terms of keeping along. What I love to do is provide some fast facts into things about wine, aspects about wine that'll help bring more understanding. So why what tell me, like, how about a little bit about Assyrtiko? So a little story about me when I was growing up, and I sort of joke with a lot of my wine loving friends about this. Grew up in a Greek household, wonderful parents. There was always something on the table. Oftentimes it was wine, sometimes it was beer. And this is back, you know mid late 70s, and this is sort of when White Zinfandel was emerging. So my mom loved little White Zinfandel, but the wine of choice and sort of the wine from my home country was Retsina. And those of you who are familiar with Retsina, or may not be, but have heard about it, those of you who have tasted it, know it is Retsina is from the origin of the word resin. So it smells and tastes like pine resin. So that was my first experience to wine. And I just like to joke, it's given that first impression of wine, it's just amazing that I found myself having a love of wine and being in the wine business and the wine appreciation business. So yeah, that was my first introduction to wine, and here we are. That's here to go. So so I shared some notes, a little bit about Assyrtiko. It is from mainly from the Santorini region in Greece. It's an island. Um, and its signature grape is Assyrtiko. It's a white grape. We'll taste it in a moment. So just seeing some folks chiming in. It's great to see everybody. Uh, all my great friends from New Jersey are joining in. Great to have you here. So I have wines here behind me, and a little bit of a fast fact for you. So this is the Santorini Assyrtiko that I'll be tasting. There's many of them, as of course you know, but this is not only my favorite Assyrtiko, the Sigalis Assyrtiko. It's one of my favorite white wines, quite honestly. And the reason I'm showing this label is when looking and reading a wine label and trying to understand what what's there and what all this information means, is Greece is one of the few old world wine producing regions that actually has the grape variety on the label. So most old world wine producing regions, France, Italy, Spain, as examples, um, typically do not have the grape varietal on the label. There's always some exceptions. One exception would be, say, Alsace in France. They label by varietal. Germany labels by varietal mostly, but most don't. And so Greece does. So what you see here is on top, you see the name of the producer, Sigalis, Domaine Sigalis, and Santorini is the denomination of origin. It's the region of where the Assyrtiko grapes were grown. In the case of this wine, you see the vintage and then the grape varietal. So very classical traditional wine label. So I'm going to pour myself a little wine. So I shared with you, and many of you have been through my wine classes, you know this by heart, and it's something I think even if you enjoy at home, is to try to do this every once in a while. It's the 5 steps of evaluating wine, and you can find out and learn so much through these 5 steps about a wine. And so we'll start from the top. The first is color. So when you white or red, and we'll do this with both wines, but when you have a wine, the first thing you want to do is look at the color, the appearance of the wine. So I have my notes here in front of me, a white piece of paper. So whether it's a tablecloth or a white, napkin or what have you, a piece of paper, but you just tilt it down. You don't want to do this. You often see this a lot, right? You see people holding up their wine glass, and you don't want to do this because you may have a painting on the wall, you may have a color on the wall, you may have a plant that I have over here. You want a clear, unobstructed white view so you can see through the wine. So with white wine, it's pretty straightforward. Um, One of the interesting points about the color in white wine, and typically as white wines go, the lighter the younger. So white wine, as it ages in the bottle, it gets darker. It gets a little more golden in color. So just by looking at this particular wine that I have, and definitely if you'd like to share in whatever you may be drinking at home, I'd love to see on the feed here what you may have. But this is a 2019 Assyrtiko, and it is very pale. It's light, as expected, because of a few reasons. One, it's young, right? 2019. Two, it was not barrel fermented, so oak imparts color, imparts flavor, imparts texture on wine, and so forth. So it's so you don't have that aspect in this particular wine. So it's young, no barrel influence to the wine at all. So it's light, and you don't want anything floating here. You don't want any particles or sediment or anything. It's just beautifully clear. Two, you want to swirl the wine. So why do we do this? Because we look good, right? And it looks good. No, you want to swirl the wine. You want to aerate the wine. And with white wine, that's certainly less of a factor than it is with red wine. And we'll get into that in a moment. But so you swirl the wine, you open it up, you let it aerate, open up different aromas. So some people talk about legs. We'll just look at that for a moment. So that's the only time I'd ever ask you to hold up a wine glass. You swirl it and you look out and you sort of see how the wine is falling from the sides of the glass. That'll give you an indication of the texture, the richness, the weight of the wine. So this is, you see they come down pretty quickly here. So if it's a higher alcohol wine, the legs will be a little thicker. If it's a lower alcohol wine, like let's say a Riesling from Germany, an 8 or 9 or 10% alcohol wine, it'll drop a little lower. So, and one thing, please, I encourage you to ask any questions. I'm going to get to some comments and questions as we go along. So please ask away, and I'll try to get to as many of these as possible. So let's see what we got here. Uh, so yeah, so if you have a wine that's say, so my good friend Chuck Crocco commented on, say if you have a wine that's 14 and a half or 14% alcohol, maybe 15% alcohol, what you'll see on the legs are a little thicker legs, a little bit more viscous. So that's always a telltale sign of that. So, all right, so let's smell the wine. I know we will definitely taste. I know you're tasting. I haven't tasted yet. We'll taste some wine. So, so third step is to smell the wine, and don't do what I call the old flyby, which is this. You want to get your nose in that glass and do it a few times. Swirl, smell, and it's unbelievable. What you will smell will often be what you will taste, but you have so many different aromatic receptors in your nose. You can pick up so much. And in this wine, and one of the great attributes of Sirchko that I love so much, it's very vibrant, very bright, beautiful sort of citrus um, fruit characteristics, but it's got really great minerality. And minerality comes from the soil. And in this case, you had this sort of this volcanic ash and gravel soil. So, so is anyone back at home? Anybody pairing anything of note? I love wine and food pairing. Anybody enjoying any shrimp or oysters or scallops with your Sirtico? Beautiful pairing. So Sirtico is definitely, being from Santorini, shellfish is benchmark food pairing. So come on, let's taste some wine here. So you get this. You want to make sure you swirl it around all the way in your mouth. This great brightness. You want to cover all parts of your palate. You're thinking about acid, fruit, tannin, alcohol. How do they all blend? And with a Sirtico, because tannin's really a non-factor because it wasn't aged in barrel. This one, anyway, some are, but you get this really linear acid fruit tension, almost like a great lemonade. High acid, real vibrant, intense, concentrated fruit, and you get this play on your palate, and they're just dancing, and it's beautiful with fish and shellfish. And then the last step is the savor. It's the memory of the wine. Is it short finish? Is it a long finish? Is it, how's the texture? Is it light, medium, or full in body? So those are the five steps going through. So my friend, all right, Peter is enjoying some fried flounder and asparagus. You're always the adventurous. I love that about you because asparagus. This could work with asparagus. It's always a challenging um, varietal in pairing. Another varietal that some of you are commenting about is from Greece is Moscafilero, which is another beautiful white grape, a little more floral, almost like a little potpourri and a little very floral wine, a little melon, a lot of fun. Love that wine as well. So a little bit about Assyrtiko. In some of the notes I shared, so one of the coolest things I think you'll see anyway, is the Assyrtiko vine. So that's what a Assyrtiko vine looks like in Santorini. And they train the vines to grow in a basket. And the reason for that in Santorini is very windy. So they train the vines to grow in a basket to protect the grape clusters from the winds. It's just a great example of what we call terroir, just the elements of the place, the soil and the climate and the sort of the history, if you will. Um, the Sirtico vines in Santorini are some of the oldest vines, contiguous growing vines in the world, some up to 3,000 years old. So you get this, I mean, many of them are old vine. This particular wine is from 60 to 70-year-old vines. Um, and you have this, again, this sort of this limestone and volcanic ash soil, which comes through, again, this minerality and salinity um, in the wine. Um, So, what I also like to talk about as well as in my classes is okay, so if you like Sauvignon Blanc, or if you like a certain grape varietal, what else can you enjoy and explore? And I think with a Sirtico, if you're not tasting it right now, or if you haven't had it before, um, it's similar to like a Sauvignon Blanc from the Loire Valley, right? From Sancerre or Puy-Fumé, or you know, a Gruner Veltliner from Austria, sort of these very high tone, high acid, mineral, intense wines. Those are two examples. So, so all right. So, um, one of my friends out there has this wine that we're enjoying right now, but no food pairing. That's all right. We can enjoy this without any food as well. Um, so we have somebody. Um, so we'll talk a little bit about food pairing. We're getting a lot of comments about food pairing. So one aspect of food pairing that often gets overlooked is texture. So one of the some main sort of techniques or principles of pairing wine is pairing body to body, right? So this is a light to medium bodied wine. You want to think about foods that are light to medium in body. So again, scallops and shellfish and sort of intense fish and seafood. Fuller bodied wines lend themselves to fuller bodied dishes and preparations and sauces. Also, acid is so important. So white wines tend to have more acid, and Assyrtiko has great acidity, and again, which always sort of lifts and elevates the flavor in food and all the different attributes in it. So body of wine and food and acidity as well. Acidity also sort of cuts through creaminess as well. So okay, so Assyrtiko, Santorini, minerality, high acid, crisp, clean, intense, great for the spring and summer, great for warmer weather. Price ranges for wine. This particular wine is $34.99. I say between 30 and $35, depending upon where you would find it. It's one of the most highly regarded Assyrticos and white wines, for that matter, in the old world. So it's really super popular wine, and rightly so. There's a Assyrtiko. I drink a Assyrtiko, and anywhere from $12 to $18 as well. So you could find it under 20. What you'll just different levels of intensity. Sometimes you'll have an Assyrtiko that's barrel fermented, obviously a little richer, a little more textural. So I gotta have a little more taste of this wine. So a question came in. So if I held this wine for another 3 or 4 years, in bottle and wherever I keep my wine, what would it taste like? Well, that's a really good question. And really, any wine, certainly, let's just talk white wine. It'll gain in color, like I mentioned, but it'll gain a little more texture, a little more richness, a little more some more tertiary flavors. It'll have a little bit less of that vibrancy and more textural and broader flavors. So you don't want to wait too long on wines like this. They're best when they're young and fresh. All right, so we'll move on to Gamay, um, and one of my favorite red wines. So let's before we jump into that, let's get into some comments. So um, Susan, is it similar to Albarino? That's a really great question. I was thinking about that. In some ways, I think some Albarino, especially from a warmer vintage, can be much fruitier than a Sirtico. But absolutely, in a typical vintage in Rias Baixas in northwestern part of Spain, where Albarino comes from, sure, because some of the best seafood in the world comes from there as well. So sure, an Albarino made in the style, a little more acid, more high tone. Absolutely, that's a great question. Let's see what else we have here. Um, oh, Dan. Okay, Dan's having Gruner with chicken. Always stellar tastes. Great to hear from you, Dan. Let's see. Okay, can't tell that one live. No, I'm teasing. Okay, so all right. So let's get to red wine. So Gamay. From France. It's from the Beaujolais region in France, and it's Beaujolais is a region that's a little south of Burgundy. It's considered a cooler climate. If you drew a line it's a little north of Bordeaux. If you were to draw a line, it's sort of a latitude line. So it's a cooler climate, and one of the few regions in the world that is dedicated to one grape variety, and that is Gamay. If you've had Gamay before and you're familiar with it, you'll know it's has this beautiful tart fruit, red fruit, and a lot of red wines have more black fruit, blackberry, black cherry, cassis, um, plum. This is more red fruit and it's more tart, cherry, cranberry, raspberry, strawberry. Um, it's a lighter to medium bodied wine, and it really expresses its place. So what's unique about Beaujolais? Beaujolais is it's mostly the better areas, the top areas, which we'll talk about, are mostly granite soil, and that comes through in these wines. They have great acid, and what's interesting about red wine is we often now think more about tannin, and this is one of the few red wines of the world, few red grape varieties that's actually higher acid, lower tannin. And if that sounds familiar, it's an attribute that many white wines have, right? High acid, lower tannin, just like the Assyrtiko or like Sauvignon Blanc, like many, cool climate Chardonnays like Riesling. But Gamay, most red wines have what? Maybe higher fruit, higher tannin, lower acid. This is more has the attributes of white wine. So an interesting point. Um, so the interesting thing to note about Beaujolais, there's really four different levels, and the base level is what we call Beaujolais. It's just the regional level. You don't see much of that in retail stores or restaurants. It's mostly locally enjoyed. Doesn't sort of get out much in terms of export. Then there's Beaujolais Village, which you see a lot of in retail. It'll simply say Beaujolais Village, and that just simply means from the villages surrounding and in and around the region of Beaujolais. And it'll often just say the name of the producer and Beaujolais Village. So sort of surrounding regions, sort of a regional wine, if you will, or sort of the better vineyards, but not the top. Very good values. The top region and what we're going to focus on is Cru Beaujolais. And there are 10 different crus, and each one, and in the handout that I had sent out in advance, it talked about uh, the 10 different crus and how they're different. But when you look at Cru Beaujolais, there's 10 different crus, and each one has a different. What I love about it, it's like us, right? We all have a different personality and style, and each cru has its own uniqueness and personality. And the one that I selected and am pouring is from the Cru of Morgon, which is you'll see quite a few Morgons in retail and restaurants. Uh, Jean Foyard Morgon, and this is from a Ludi. It's a almost a single vineyard. Eponyme is the designation here of the vineyard. 2017, Jean Foyard. So beautiful producer. 2017 is the vintage, and if we look at this wine and sort of go through our steps, but if you can sort of see here, I won't spill that on my laptop. But if you have a Beaujolais, or let's say you have a Pinot Noir, sort of a similar like varietal, or Barbera from northern Italy, similar like varietal as well, high acid, lower tannin, is it's a little paler, and if you look, it's a little lighter, I should say. But one thing about red wine, when you look at it, it's a little bit more interesting than white, because you can tell a lot from the rim. So if you're looking at your red wine, if you haven't already drank it, and you have some in your glass, and you're tilting it, the rim on a Beaujolais or on younger red wines is it's lighter. Sometimes it's watery, sometimes it's sort of pink, or a violet in color. So that's an indication of youth. So this, as you saw, was a 2017. So as red wines get older, they actually lose color, and that rim starts to lose that pink color and becomes a little more like a little rust, or tawny, or brown. So let's swirl this beautiful wine. And with red wines, you need to swirl more. Why? Because red wines have a component more so than white wines, and that's tannin. Tannin is almost serves as a jacket. It restricts the wine a little bit. It's sort of the bones of a wine. So with red wines, you want to swirl. You want to open it up, release the aromas, and break down a little bit of that tannin, soften it. And boy, wow. So one of the beautiful attributes of Beaujolais, in addition to that tart red fruit that I spoke about, is you get, especially with this producer, almost a herbaceous, again, that minerality, that granite soil, but a little herbaceous, and almost like a little tarragon. It's really beautiful. And with red wine, or with acidity, you can feel it on your palate, sort of a tingling. And this is absolutely beautiful. Again, it's really bright. And you obviously, and touching this wine with wines like Gamay and Beaujolais, um, and quite honestly, Pinot Noir, lighter reds, Barbera, Dolcetto, it's best to serve them a little chilled. So this is actually cellar temp. This is high 50s, about 60 or so. So it's cool, and it just brings out, with the higher acid wine, just brings it just a little fresher, a little brighter. Um, just makes it that much more enjoyable. Um, so, so if you're just getting started in wine, and sort of what are some wines that you should be thinking about? I think to focus in on, I think it's always easiest. I cut my teeth on California wines. I adore California wines. It's always my go to, and part of who I am. Um, with New World wines, right? United States, and Australia, and Chile, and South Africa, and New Zealand, Argentina. New World wines tend to be a little more fruit forward, a little more uh, ready. I would say ready to drink, but it's a little more fruit forward. I think they're a nice way to sort of get started. These, and then old world wines just take a little bit more understanding of the information behind them. But I would just say drink, experiment, and just keep tasting, and you'll find your way. That's really the way to do it. So a little bit more on Beaujolais. So, what makes Cru Beaujolais special, and to that level? So it's on the sort of the higher elevations um, of this granite soil and these villages. So the quality of the fruit is that much greater, more concentrated, a little smaller production. And these wines can actually age. You could put any of these, a really good cru Beaujolais producer, you could put these wines away for 5, 7, 8, even 10 years. I know most of my friends don't have the patience to do that, but if you do, it will reward you. You may be surprised, but they are great young, and they're really great to enjoy. Um, so so I have some food and wine comments here. So uh, Lois, oh, beautiful! Look at that calamari salad with a sirtico. That's spot on, perfect, perfect. I mean, octopus, and it's perfect. So my dear um, Cypriot friend, uh, Gamay with skirt steak, of course. Well done, Ellie. I expect no less out of you. Great pairing. I'm sure you and Ben are enjoying that. Hillary, oh, Cote de Brie. So, oh, good call. So I had a coat. I was going to bring a Cote de Brie from downstairs, but the other one I brought, I'm not going to open it, but it's just another example. This is what we call a fleury. It's just a different crew, and this is from Julien Sounier, another great producer. So, how do you know it's a Cru Beaujolais? Is you look at the label, it'll have the name of the producer. Usually, it's smaller, and then the name of the crew is larger. So you see Morgon and Fleury are larger fonts. So that's how you know. And so we'll answer a few. Any questions, Hun? Any more things to comment on? Um, All right, so this is always a great question. What are your top three red and white wines? That's a whole other. That's something to be talked about over a bottle of wine. But um, I think for me, I love wine, and to really say, what's your favorite wine? I drink it all. I appreciate different expressions and what the world of wine and regions have to offer. And I think if anyone in who does what I do, will say that and will feel that and truly and honestly do. But that said, I tend to drink more old world wines. I love aromatic, bright, crisp white wines like a Sirtico. I love the wines from the Loire Valley, Sancerre and Puy-Fumé. Love uh, Vouvray and Chenin Blanc from Loire. I enjoy, lighter reds. I love Italian wines, whites and reds. My wife and I were in Italy, northern Italy last year, and fell in love. We were always in love, always, and we continue to be in love, thankfully. Um, but we fell in love with the wines from northern Italy. And the Arnay, so that's another white wine, sort of similar to Sirtico from the Piemonte region. But Arnays for white, and sort of Barbera and Dolcetto and Nebbiolo, the northern Italian reds. And so I think for me, it's more what I'm eating and the temperature and the weather and all of that always factors in for me. Oh, thanks, Samantha. Woo. So we'll wrap it up a little bit now, in terms of shopping for wine. So as I do my wine classes, I'm not a retailer, so I won't have the ability to ship you wines that are coordinated or connected to these themes. But you'll know the theme in advance, and if you have something or you're able to procure it from your local retailer. I mean, obviously now it's very and not complicated, but not as easy as it was when we could just jump out and run to a wine store. But I know a lot of wine shops are curbside pickup and so forth. But even if you can't enjoy the wine that we're featuring on the class, you'll learn about something and just open up a bottle and enjoy. Um, but the classes coming up on the 16th and 23rd are: the 16th is exploring Sonoma, sort of talking about the diversity and the exciting aspects of what's happening in Sonoma, and so many different varietals, so many different aspects to Sonoma in California. And then the next class on the 23rd will focus in on probably my favorite red grape variety, and that's Pinot Noir. And we'll focus in on comparing Burgundy in Oregon, the two regions in the world that specialize in Pinot Noir. And we'll talk about the differences and the similarities and what makes it so unique. Um, so there's a link to register for those wines, excuse me, for those classes on the educatedgrape.com. So those are classes that there's a $25 charge for the link. And it'll be a little bit more expansive in terms of notes. And when you sign up for that, I will email you the PDF of the notes and the maps, as you'll have all of that in advance. And we'll also have the opportunity to chat and hear questions, and sort of really in a little bit more of a um, uh, more comprehensive environment to do that. And we'll dig in a little deeper. So I really, really appreciate your time. Um, these are challenging times for all of us, unprecedented times, and I am so blessed um, to be able to be here safe with my family and enjoying wine, and sort of um, sharing the aspects of that and with the joy that it brings to our life. So we wish you all the very best. Look forward to connecting with all of you very soon, next Thursday, and I'll be posting new classes as we go along. So again, all of you, thank you. Cheers. um, and stay healthy. Be well. Thank you.